What happens when a woman who rebuilt the food supply chain of an entire region gets stopped at an airport gate simply because she doesn't look like she belongs? What if the person holding a $48 million contract for first-class meals is treated like an intruder in the very system she helped rescue from collapse? And what if she doesn't yell, doesn't cry, doesn't call for the media, but still manages to shake the foundation of an entire corporation with just one phone call? This is the true story of Ariana Collins, a CEO, a mother, a farmer's daughter, who stood still at gate 17 and made the whole world look inward. What was it about her silence that made powerful people scramble? And how did her quiet defiance become a blueprint for a new kind of change? Grab your seat, because once you step into this story, you may start to question what you think you know about power, prejudice, and presence. If stories like this move you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. At the heart of the busy LaGuardia Airport, a 38-year-old single mother approached the first-class check-in counter with a boarding pass in one hand and a multi-million-dollar contract tucked neatly inside her weathered leather handbag. Her steps were steady, deliberate, not out of haste, but from years of experience moving through spaces not always made to welcome her. But instead of receiving the courtesy often reserved for elite passengers and senior corporate partners, she was met with the sharp, narrow gaze of a young airline employee who seemed to question whether she belonged at all. "This lane is for first-class passengers." The words weren't a misunderstanding. They were a verdict disguised as policy. And in that moment, no one knew that within minutes, the woman they were trying to quietly push aside would send a jolt through Aerovista Airlines' entire operational system, disrupt boardroom schedules, and force an industry to confront its deepest discomforts. Because when you underestimate a black woman simply because she doesn't fit the image you've grown used to, you don't just make a mistake. You jeopardize the very foundation of your business. And the most startling part, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't call the press. She simply made one phone call. And what followed forced an entire corporation to bow to the quiet strength they had misjudged. That morning, just before daylight broke over the city skyline, Ariana Collins stepped into the check-in lobby at gate C12. Her heels made a soft rhythm across the polished marble floor, confident, graceful, unhurried. She wore a tailored black pantsuit, subtle in style, but unmistakably commanding, with a muted olive silk scarf knotted around her neck. At 38, Ariana was the founder and CEO of Collins Earth Produce, a food systems enterprise responsible for supplying fresh, sustainable meals to some of the largest transit networks in the country. She was also a single mother, whose path had never been easy, but had always been hers. This morning, she didn't come to prove anything. She simply held a first-class ticket and a printed speech she would deliver at the Pacific Food Innovation Summit in Seattle. Her left hand gripped a burnished leather bag and old but beloved birthday gift from her teenage son in her right. She held a first-class boarding pass clearly printed with the name Ariana Collins, Flight AV218, Seat 1A, LaGuardia to Seattle. The waiting area was still hushed, scattered with drowsy travelers nursing paper coffee cups and tugging sleepy toddlers. Ariana made her way to the check-in counter where a young woman in a Navy Aerovista uniform stood behind the screen. "Good morning," Ariana said, with a calm, courteous smile, offering her ticket. The attendant, Jenna Whitmore, glanced at it quickly, but then paused. A second look followed. Her expression changed, almost imperceptibly, but enough that Ariana recognized it. She'd seen that look too many times, measuring, doubting, dismissing. Jenna's brows knit slightly. No smile. No greeting. "This lane is for first-class passengers, ma'am," she said coolly, her voice clipped and sterile. Ariana didn't flinch. She didn't smile. Either. There was no need to. "I'm aware," she replied, meeting Jenna's gaze with poise, her voice unwavering. For a brief moment, the air seemed to shift. A small chill ran down Jenna's spine, not from the temperature, but from the weight of presence standing in front of her. Yet she didn't move. She didn't scan the ticket. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, frozen in a decision she hadn't yet made. In her mind, something didn't align. Here stood a black woman, impeccably dressed, holding a legitimate first-class pass. And yet, she didn't fit. She didn't match the mental image of who Jenna was trained to expect in Seat 1A. What neither Jenna nor anyone else nearby realized was that the woman before them wasn't just another traveler. Ariana Collins was the very architect of the Fresh Food Initiative that Aerovista Airlines had proudly announced just weeks earlier. But on this morning, Ariana wasn't a keynote speaker or strategic partner. Not in Jenna's eyes. She was simply someone who didn't belong. And so began the quiet tension, the small pause that would soon unravel the image of a company and expose a truth it hadn't prepared to face. Jenna continued holding the boarding pass, still not scanning it. A few uncomfortable seconds dragged by. Then, subtly, she leaned slightly to the side and glanced toward a uniformed security officer near the baggage screening belt. The gesture was small but intentional. Jenna Whitmore, recently transferred from Little Rock Regional, was trying hard to make a good impression in her new role at a high-profile airport. In training meetings, she'd been told to prioritize first-class service and uphold safety protocol, but what she hadn't been trained to recognize was the fine line where caution becomes bias, where procedure masks prejudice. What Jenna Whitmore had never been trained to detect was the subtle face of prejudice when it hides behind official procedures. Her voice was steady but not firm when she said, "I need to see your ID." Ariana Collins didn't blink. She tilted her head slightly, eyes steady and deep, as if she could see beyond the spoken words into the hesitation, the fear of being wrong, and the quiet discomfort Jenna was struggling to disguise. Without speaking, Ariana reached into the pocket of her long black coat and pulled out her driver's license from Ohio. She placed it gently on the counter, neatly, without the slightest shake in her hand. Jenna took it, paused, and then did nothing. She didn't scan it, didn't verify the name. She just let it sit there like a placeholder for time she didn't know how to fill. Then, Jenna stepped back, 2 slow paces. She lifted her radio to her lips and whispered into it. Moments later, a tall security officer in a Navy Aerovista uniform appeared. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't offer a greeting. He simply positioned himself beside Ariana with stiff shoulders and narrowed eyes as though he were monitoring a threat. But Ariana didn't move. She didn't sigh or speak. She had lived through enough of these moments to know exactly what this was. And more importantly, what it wasn't. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't uncertainty. It was familiarity in disguise. She had once walked into a 5-star hotel in Dallas, Texas, prepared to deliver a keynote at a corporate summit, only to be stopped by a concierge asking for a membership card. Another time, she had sat in a boardroom with a client who mistook her for the assistant there to take notes. Now, dressed in a bespoke black suit, holding a first-class ticket with her name on it, she was being regarded like someone who had wandered into the wrong room. With her right hand gripping the handle of her son's leather gift, Ariana reached into her coat pocket with the other and drew out her phone. She unlocked it, tapped into her contacts, and made a call. It only rang twice. "Camille, it's me," she said. On the other end, Camille Rhodes, Ariana's longtime executive assistant, didn't ask a thing. Ariana continued, her voice low and steady. "Pull the Aero Vista contract, the $48 million deal for the full Western Fresh Corridor. We signed it less than 2 weeks ago. I'm at LaGuardia, Gate C12. It looks like someone forgot. I'm on it," Camille replied, already typing. "Do you want me to call Vanessa Liu directly?" Ariana's eyes shifted to Jenna, who was now pretending to be preoccupied with the screen in front of her. "Not yet. Just mark the alert," Ariana replied. "They'll figure it out soon enough." She ended the call. In her hand was still the unscanned boarding pass, clearly marked Flight AV-218 Seat 1A. She remained still, poised, saying nothing, while the security officer loomed beside her and Jenna continued to avoid eye contact. Behind her, the morning crowd began to gather. A few curious passengers leaned toward each other, whispering in hushed tones. "What's going on? Maybe the ticket's fake. She doesn't look like she belongs in first class." Ariana heard every word. She didn't flinch. She didn't turn around. She simply stood there, like a woman waiting for an elevator, silent, collected, but with each passing second, a hidden system built on assumptions, shaped by old narratives, was beginning to tremble. She didn't need to make a scene. She just needed to be there, still holding the strap of her bag. Ariana's thoughts drifted, not out of avoidance, but because memory had a way of grounding her in moments like these. She returned to a winter morning in Columbus, Ohio, her childhood home. The chill in the air bitten through her gloves as she stood beside her mother outside the back of a small grocery store on Denby Street. Her mother, Ariana Collins, worked there 6 days a week, unloading crates before sunrise. She never walked in alone. Little Ariana, just 9 at the time, would tag along, half asleep and wrapped in a second-hand coat, her small hand clasped tightly around the hem of her mother's apron. They would carry crates of apples, cabbage, and carrots from the truck to the back shelves. There were no dreams of businesses, no talk of building empires, just quiet mornings filled with movement, earth, and sweat. But Ariana had learned something no school could teach her: how her mother treated people. Not just with words, but with eyes, with grace, with presence. When customers hesitated between 2 melons, her mother didn't just tell them which one to pick. She would lift both, tap the rind, smell the skin, then smile. "You should pick this one." She'd say, "It'll be sweeter." The sun's been stronger the past few days. It was never about the sale. It was always about the care. Years later, when Ariana's classmates were sending off applications to Ivy League schools, she chose Ohio University, not out of limitation, but intention. She worked part-time in a chili produce warehouse, her fingers raw from sorting crates before sunrise. While others dreamed of executive titles, Ariana dreamed of shortening the distance between farm and plate. While other teenagers groaned about early mornings and missed alarms, Ariana Collins had long since learned to wake with the sound of metal carts clattering across damp concrete floors. By the time she graduated with a degree in agricultural business from Ohio University, she had just $300 in her savings, an aging Ford pickup that coughed with every ignition, and one idea so bold. No one took it seriously at first. Make fresh, traceable produce the baseline for every table in American, not a luxury, but a standard. It didn't begin in a boardroom or with an investor pitch. It began at the edge of a cracked parking lot in suburban Youngstown, Ohio, with a roadside vegetable stand and a hand-painted wooden sign that read "Fresh from farm to your hands in 24 hours." No one believed that promise until they saw her, driving herself to rural farms at 4 a.m, hand-sorting peppers and potatoes in the fading afternoon light. There were no assistants, no marketing team, no outside funding, just her grit, a weathered whiteboard, and a willpower that even setbacks couldn't starve. The breakthrough came not from innovation, but from observation. Ariana saw what others missed: a gap between luxury organic and mass-market produce. While big corporations catered to high-end buyers chasing trends, Ariana focused on the working families, the ones shopping weekly, the ones filling school cafeterias, the ones flying coach and first class. She started visiting family farms across Ohio, listening first, persuading second. She convinced growers to adopt GAP Good Agricultural Practices standards. Then she did something rare. She removed the middlemen. Ariana created her own logistics loop: small trucks, precise routes, direct-to-store deliveries. Her produce made its way not just into independent markets and school cafeterias, but eventually into airport lounges and airline meal trays. When asked why airlines, she always gave the same answer: because first class defines standards. And I want those standards to start with a clean carrot. Her company, Collins Earth Produce, was born inside a garage with poor heating and a second-hand laptop that crashed every other Tuesday. But 15 years later, she'd become the primary supplier for 34 top-tier supermarket chains, 5 major university systems, and most recently Aerovista Airlines, who had signed a $48 million contract to revolutionize their entire in-flight dining experience. And now, here she stood, at gate C-12, quiet, stoic, waiting for her boarding pass to be scanned. To Jenna Whitmore, she looked like an anomaly. To the company, she was an anchor. But that morning, Jenna couldn't see the quiet empire Ariana had built. She couldn't see the conference rooms Ariana had stepped into to fix a problem no one else could, because just 3 months earlier, Aerovista Airlines had become a meme. A viral TikTok from a first-class passenger showed a tray of frost-covered meatloaf, limp pasta, and plastic-packed crackers. The caption was brutal: "Pay $5,000 to eat like you're in prison." The video exploded. Across platforms, the airline was mocked mercilessly. Memes, duets, rants—it all spiraled. Executives scrambled. At the Minneapolis headquarters, meetings turned into triage. The communications team deleted hundreds of comments daily, trying to stem the tide. The internal review was even more damning. "We don't just have a food issue," the brand director admitted. "We have an image issue." Someone in the room had said, "We need a turnaround, not a Campania solution." That's when Ariana Collins' name surfaced. Not because she had a slick brand, not because Collins Earth had fancy headquarters. In fact, the company still operated out of a humble office in a converted factory lot in Toledo, Ohio. No, her name came up because people remembered what she delivered. She didn't pitch. She brought results. When Aerovista reached out, Ariana didn't send a polished deck with buzzwords. She didn't bring a sales team or a carefully rehearsed CFO. She walked into the 18th floor conference room with a cloth tote bag and a simple, stapled proposal black text. White paper. No graphs. No slogans. But inside that bag, cherry tomatoes grown in Indiana, kale harvested from the Ozark foothills, whole grain bread made fresh in a Missouri cooperative, all packaged in biodegradable, compostable wraps that smelled faintly of citrus. When she laid the samples on the table, one executive, a former chef, lifted the lid and blinked. "Is this the sample batch?" he asked, stunned by the scent. Ariana smiled. "No, this is the real thing." This is what your passengers will eat if you stop freezing your standards. In her 37-page proposal, Ariana laid out the Fresh Altitude program. It wasn't just about food. It was a complete overhaul of how food got from farm to flight. Seasonal menus, updated monthly sourcing based on flight paths to cut emissions, direct contracts with farmers' no-brokers, biodegradable packaging, saving $1, $2 million a year in waste removal, shorter shelf life, higher freshness, a projected 41% reduction in meal returns. There was silence at the table, then a nod, then a signature. In less than a week, the contract was signed. Ariana's company would cover all meals on Aerovista's Western and Midwestern routes, with an option to expand internationally pending success. No press conference was held, no influencers tagged. Ariana refused the offer to be featured in ads. "I'm not the story," she had said. "The food is." But now on this cold morning at Gate C-12, none of that seemed to matter. To Jenna, she was just a woman who didn't fit the picture. Too still, too sure, too unexpected. What Jenna didn't realize was that the woman she had just stalled was the very one who had saved the airline from collapse. Despite the growing media buzz around Aerovista Airlines' dramatic food transformation, Ariana Collins refused every spotlight. When the company's internal communications team suggested producing a promotional video to showcase the visionary woman behind the Fresh Altitude program, she declined immediately. "Don't put my face on a meal tray," she said plainly. "I'm not a brand. The only thing that should be recognized is the quality on the customer's plate." They pushed further, reminding her of her influence. "But you're the leader, the inspiration." Ariana's response was calm, but unmistakably resolute. "I'm also a mother raising a child on roasted carrots and rising utility bills. I'm not here to be your role model. I'm here to do what needs to be done. Now." After all that, after saving the airline from becoming a meme, after building a model that restored trust from the tarmac to the tray table, Ariana stood quietly at Gate C-12, being scrutinized as if she were a trespasser in first class. No one at Aerovista realized it, not yet. She didn't argue, she didn't shout, but she understood exactly what was happening. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a system glitch. It was something far older and far more dangerous. Prejudice wrapped in policy. Behind the check-in desk, Jenna Whitmore was still pretending to search the screen, fingers tapping meaningless keys. But she knew the truth. There was no error. The name matched the manifest. The seat number was correct. The flight information aligned perfectly. But something still felt wrong. Not wrong in data, wrong in assumption. How could someone like her be in seat 1A? Jenna wasn't malicious, but she was a byproduct of an environment that had quietly, consistently taught her what success looks like and what it doesn't. She had seen the company's internal campaign visuals. First-class passengers were always photographed the same way: sleek, white, composed, wealthy-looking. Ariana didn't fit the image, and that invisible mismatch became a mental warning, disguised as something feels off. It was a small assumption, but it came at the worst time, and with the worst person. At that moment, Camille Rhodes, Ariana's longtime assistant, had just finished pulling the contract. Without delay, she forwarded the full PDF to 3 high-level contacts within Aerovista: Vanessa Liu, Northeast Regional Director Marcus Halliday, Executive Director of Food and Customer Experience Sophie Trent, Head of Brand Crisis Management. Her message was short, but sharp: VIP guest Ariana Collins being held at LaGuardia Gate C-12. $48 million contract. Strongly suggest reviewing camera footage and personnel behavior immediately. 3 minutes later, Vanessa Liu rose from her chair in the middle of a marketing strategy session, leaving her untouched coffee behind as she stormed out of the meeting. The name Ariana Collins wasn't known by every department, but for someone like Vanessa, who handled contract accounts the size of regional budgets, it was a name that could make or break the quarterly review. Her heels echoed sharply against the glass-paneled corridor overlooking the terminals. Something had shifted. This wasn't just a customer delay. This was a system fracture. And the woman standing calmly at gate C12, her boarding pass still in Jenna's hand, had just become the tremor before the quake. The surrounding atmosphere had changed. The silence wasn't the kind found in peaceful early mornings. It was tight, tense, uncomfortable. People in the waiting area began to glance toward the counter more frequently. A few checked their watches. Some scrolled through their phones. A couple of children pulled at their parents' sleeves. Then came the whispers. Why hasn't she moved? Maybe she's trying to sneak into first class. Probably a fake ticket. A middle-aged man in a gray windbreaker leaned toward his companion. Bluetooth earpiece blinking blue. Another one who thinks a nice suit gets you into row 1. Ariana heard it all. She didn't react. She didn't lower her gaze. Her face remained composed, her spine straight, her presence unshaken. She knew this brand of judgment intimately, the kind that didn't call itself by name, but lurked in the glances, in the hesitation, in the assumption that some people simply don't belong. She stood as if rooted into the ground firm, quiet, undisturbed, because she understood a hard truth. In a world where whiteness was often the measure of success, a black woman who spoke clearly and moved confidently was often seen not as admirable, but as threatening. Inside the counter, Jenna still sat stiffly. Her screen had long since stopped showing new information. She had no excuse left. Ariana's data was perfect, but she couldn't let go of that persistent doubt, unspoken, irrational, but strong. She doesn't look like the kind of person I usually see in seat 1A. That thought was never voiced. It never needed to be, because it lived inside the decision-making space that never required evidence, only emotion. That's where discrimination hides best, not in laws, but in instincts. The security guard beside Ariana remained silent, but visibly watchful. He hadn't moved, but he stood too close. His stance said what his words didn't. I'm here in case she causes a problem. No one asked why he was there, and yet everyone understood. She could feel the security guard shadow stretch across her hand. He didn't touch her, but his presence made it unmistakably clear she was being watched, and around her not a single voice spoke in her defense. No one asked what was going on. The terminal, full of people, with carry-ons and coffee cups, turned into a theater of silence and whispers. A blonde woman in a designer blazer leaned toward her companion and muttered, "Probably used reward points. Aerovista's getting too generous lately." Nearby, a young man slowly raised his phone and snapped a photo. No consent, no justification, just instinct. Ariana didn't turn. She didn't react, but her grip on her leather bag tightened slightly, not from fear, but from that familiar ache, the kind of pain that doesn't come from surprise, but from repetition. A disappointment layered over 1,000 others. In Toledo, when she had first started making deliveries herself after her first supermarket contract, she had been stopped at the entrance. "Deliveries go to the back." A store clerk had said coldly, "You're in the wrong place." Ariana didn't argue. She simply circled to the rear, signed the delivery slip, and drove off. In New Orleans, she'd entered a luxury watch store with her son. Within minutes, they were being followed by staff. Her son tugged her coat. "Mom, why's he watching you like that?" She gave him a half smile and whispered, "Because I look like someone they assume will steal." And now, here she was, decades of hard-won ground later surrounded by sleek hallways and polite smiles, still facing the same silent suspicion in a new uniform. But while the crowd whispered and the guard loomed, something else was beginning to move behind the scenes. Inside Aerovista's 10th floor operations office at LaGuardia, Vanessa Liu had just opened an urgent message from Camille Rhodes. Attached to the email was a scanned contract. Subject line: VIP guest Ariana Collins being held at Gate C12. Urgent, elsewhere, at the company's headquarters in Minneapolis. Marcus Halliday, Executive Director of Food and Customer Experience, was reviewing the very same contract he had proudly signed 42 days earlier. As soon as he saw the subject line and attachment, his stomach dropped. He knew exactly what this meant. If word got out, this wouldn't just be a personnel issue. It would be a catastrophic brand disaster. Ariana wasn't just a supplier. She was the face, the heartbeat of their new identity. The Fresh Altitude campaign was built around her food, her model, her story. At Gate C12, Tara Jensen, another check-in agent, had started to sense something was off. She leaned over toward Jenna Whitmore, speaking quietly. "Is there actually a problem here?" Jenna's fingers didn't stop tapping. She didn't look up. "I don't know. Something just doesn't sit right. My gut says something's off." Tara's eyebrows drew together. "Your instinct. That's not policy." "Jenna, it should have been enough." But Jenna had already committed too far, emotionally and procedurally, to back down easily. Confronting the truth now meant admitting that her judgment, based on nothing but a glance, had been flawed. And meanwhile, Ariana Collins still hadn't said a word. She didn't need to. Her eyes, sharp and unflinching, carried more weight than any protest. The same gaze she had used to negotiate seven-figure supply contracts. The same gaze that had stared down VPs pushing for backdoor deals. The gaze of a woman who didn't need permission to stand still. Back in Minneapolis, the silence inside a 16th floor conference room was broken by a sharp clatter, the sound of a pristine white plate slipping from someone's hand and grazing the edge of a salmon salad. Marcus Halliday froze. On the screen in front of him was Camille's email, complete with the attached $48 million agreement. And at the bottom, a line in bold, "Ariana Collins is being illegally held at Gate C12. Vanessa Liu's team is on site. Act now." His phone slid from his grip and hit the table with a loud thud. Around the room, executive heads turned, startled. Marcus didn't explain. He didn't need to. The only thing ringing in his ears was the Fresh Altitude launch speech he'd been rehearsing, the speech that began with real food, real roots, real altitude. Ariana Collins was supposed to be the unseen star of the campaign. She had refused to appear in marketing. She had declined the press interviews. But everyone internally knew she was the campaign. They had even shot B-roll footage on her farm. A documentary feature was in post-production. A web headline had already been drafted. "The Woman Who Feeds America from the Earth." And now that woman, calm, patient, dangerously still, was being held up by a gate agent based on nothing more than a gut feeling. Marcus grabbed his phone, dialing Vanessa. But the call didn't need to go through, because in New York, Vanessa Liu had already moved into action. She tossed her quarterly planning notes aside, grabbed her phone and heels, and stormed down the hallway, leaving behind startled interns and coffee cups still steaming. "Get me Sean and Sophie from legal, now!" She barked at her assistant. "Right now, not in 5 minutes, not after this call. Now." What happened? A gate agent just detained the wrong woman, she said through gritted teeth. Not just a VIP, the cornerstone of our next campaign. The one whose food we're serving in first class. The woman whose name we should be printing on every tray. She was already heading for the elevator. Ariana Collins had remained silent long enough, but the system was finally about to break its own silence. Vanessa Liu walked briskly down the glass corridor of LaGuardia's executive level, her heels clicking like clockwork against the polished marble floor. The window beside her revealed a wide stretch of tarmac and the rising sun behind a waiting row of aircraft. But Vanessa wasn't looking outside. She had never seen anything like this. A company that prided itself on internal reform, that had just signed a landmark contract with a supplier known for sustainability and dignity, had sabotaged itself with nothing more than a glance laced with bias. Back at gate C-12, Ariana Collins still stood quietly, a pillar of composure amid a growing ripple of whispers and curious stares. The silent storm around her was no longer just about a boarding pass. Meanwhile, Tara Jensen, the second boarding agent, had reopened the airline's internal vendor database. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled through the contract logs for Q1 and Q2. Then she saw it. Contract code AV2024FF03. Supplier Collins Earth Produce. Executive Representative Ariana Collins. The name burned on the screen. Tara stared for a beat too long. She turned slowly toward Jenna, her voice tight with urgency. "Do you know who you're holding out there?" Jenna's response was automatic, but defensive. "She's a passenger. Needs verification." Why Tara didn't blink. She's not just a passenger. She's the CEO of the company that supplies every first-class meal for the next 2 quarters. You're holding the wrong person. Jenna froze. The screen blurred. Her ears buzzed. She looked up, back at Ariana, still waiting, still silent, and felt a wave of confusion, disbelief, and sudden shame. How could she be the CEO? Why wasn't I told? Is this even real? Did I just make a massive mistake? But truth doesn't need volume. It only needs timing. And right on cue. The sharp rhythm of high heels returned louder this time. From the far end of the gate entrance, Vanessa Liu appeared, her bright red blazer like a signal flare across a field of Navy uniforms. Behind her walked Justin Cole, Eastern legal representative, and a senior compliance officer with an earpiece steadily feeding him updates. Jenna straightened. Tara instinctively stepped back. She knew this wasn't a conversation. They were witnessing a response. Vanessa didn't need to ask who Ariana was. Her eyes locked on the woman beside the silent security guard. No badge, no flash, just presence. When some people stand still, power moves toward them. Vanessa stepped forward and extended her hand with calm authority. "Ms. Collins, I'm Vanessa Liu, Northeast Regional Director of Aero Vista Airlines. I sincerely apologize for this situation. I'd like to invite you to a private lounge to resolve this matter." Ariana's eyes studied Vanessa quietly, then slipped her phone back into her bag and nodded once. "Do you know what seat I was assigned?" she asked. "1A," Vanessa replied immediately. A slight smile curled on Ariana's lips, but it wasn't warm. It was razor sharp. "Interesting," she murmured, "because someone here just told me this lane was only for premium passengers." No one spoke. They didn't need to. The mistake wasn't procedural. It was visual. And that kind of mistake costs more than time. It cracks the foundation of everything a company claims to stand for. Justin Cole took a step forward, about to speak. But Ariana raised a hand. "I'm not here for an apology. Mr. Cole, I want to know how a company that just trusted me with its brand can turn around and treat me like I don't belong." No answer came. because there wasn't one that would suffice. What Ariana demanded wasn't a statement. It was recognition. For Aerovista, this wasn't just a PR dilemma anymore. It was a structural fault line. Jenna stood behind the counter, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles blanched. Every word Ariana spoke echoed in her ears like a slow, steady alarm. They told me this lane is for premium passengers. Jenna couldn't hear anything else. Not the boarding announcements, not the idle chatter, not even the drag of luggage wheels across the tile. Her mistake was no longer theoretical, it had a face, a voice, and a contract worth $48 million. Tara leaned in again, her voice sharp this time. "Do you understand what you just did?" Jenna said nothing. She just nodded, her head moving almost imperceptibly. In her mind, all the compliance modules blurred together. The trainings, the reminders about first impressions, the cautionary phrases from supervisors about reading body language and gut instincts. All of it had built up to this moment, and now it was crumbling under its own contradiction. Because the look she had used to judge Ariana, instead of simply scanning the ticket, had now turned back toward her in every camera, in every bystander's phone, and soon, possibly, online. She took a step back. It felt as if her shoes had been bolted to the floor. The crowd had grown. Some scrolled through their phones, pretending to be distracted. Others discreetly filmed with their cameras angled just enough to seem accidental. But the energy had shifted. It was no longer confusion. It was realization. They didn't know the details, but they could feel it. "This mattered?" Jenna muttered under her breath, as if trying to bargain with herself. "If I let her board now, everyone will know I messed up." Tara turned her face away, offering no rescue, because the truth was clear now. The actual mistake wasn't in the process. It was in the look, the one that said, "You don't fit here." And that look, passed silently from one person to the next, had now come full circle. What unsettled Jenna Whitmore most wasn't that she had been wrong, it was that even now, she was still trying to protect her own image while the system behind her quietly fractured. Across the glass wall, overlooking the runway, Ariana Collins stood beside Vanessa Liu, exchanging quiet words. No one could hear their conversation, but they didn't need to. The tension in their body language made it clear. This wasn't a customer service issue. This was a contractual crisis. Inside Aerovista's legal operations, Justin Cole had already begun updating the crisis team through the internal network. "The issue is no longer procedural," he typed. "It's behavioral. There are signs of implicit bias in agent conduct. The contract is vulnerable." The warning hit like a soft but steady blow. In Minneapolis, Marcus Halliday read the same message. His stomach sank. "She's calm," Vanessa had written, "but she's not here for an apology." The words hit hard, like a dull blade gliding under the surface of the brand's skin, not bloody, but bruising. Back at gate C12, Jenna watched Ariana again. She was neither towering nor flashy, not the stereotypical CEO Jenna had seen in glossy profiles and conference pamphlets. But there was something in Ariana's stillness, something in the clarity of her presence that made no one dare interrupt. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look for approval. She simply was, and that gazy steadfast, unwavering, cutting through everything unsaid, was the very thing Jenna had been trained to ignore. It was that gaze that broke her. Jenna couldn't hide behind procedure anymore. She couldn't say, "I was just doing my job," because Ariana had done everything right. And it was she, the one doing her job, who had made everything wrong. in that moment. Ariana quietly unzipped her leather bag. No dramatic gesture, no fury. She pulled out a cream-colored folder plane, thick, dignified. Inside was the original $48 million contract Collins Earth had signed with Aerovista. White paper, clean black ink, 3 executive signatures clearly printed. She didn't raise it above her head. She didn't slam it down. She simply handed it to Vanessa Liu with both hands, calmly, deliberately. "I don't need a tweet," Ariana said, her voice steady. "I don't need a PR apology. I need something better." She looked briefly toward Jenna behind the counter, then continued, "Because the next person you treat like they don't belong may not have the regional director's number, and they definitely won't be holding a multi-million-dollar contract." Jenna couldn't hear the words, but she saw it something unmistakable. Vanessa Liu, always composed in every boardroom, lowered her head ever so slightly, a bow not of formality, but of recognition. It was the moment everyone present realized who truly held the power in that space. Across the tarmac, inside the jet, waiting at Gate C-12, a silent message had reached the flight crew. VIP guest, CEO of Collins Earth Produce. Provide full discretion and maximum assistance. No unnecessary engagement. In the front cabin, Jordan Avery, the head flight attendant, gently adjusted a chilled bottle of spring water with a silver cap. He smoothed the tablecloth on seat 1A, then he paused, eyes focused on the cabin door. He didn't know exactly what had happened out there. But one thing was clear. Someone had just tried to deny boarding to a woman whose name the company didn't dare speak for too long, but would now never forget. Back at the gate, Ariana stood still, her body composed, her shoulders unbowed. Every whisper behind her, the gawking, the second-guessing, meant nothing now. She didn't look at the faces of judgment. She looked through them, through the windows, toward the rumbling carts and blinking beacons of the morning runway. From this height, everything seemed smaller, even people, even doubt, and in that smallness, she saw a familiar version of herself. There was the time she had attended a shareholders meeting as the newest approved supplier. She had walked into a marble-floored lobby, where men in cream suits clustered in tight circles sipping espresso. A woman at the reception desk looked up, then rushed toward her. "Are you here to clear the conference table?" she'd asked with a smile, "or deliver the handouts?" Ariana didn't reply. She reached into her bag, pulled out the formal invitation, and walked past her. She sat in the front row, back straight, expression calm. Another time, she visited a luxury car showroom in Houston, looking to lease a hybrid van for produce deliveries. A well-dressed saleswoman with a polished ponytail greeted her, eyes darting briefly from Ariana's worn heels to her plain handbag. "The used cars are in the back," she said kindly. "This model is usually reserved for corporate clients." Ariana had simply smiled. "Perfect," she replied. "I am one." She didn't buy the car there. She didn't need to prove anything, because power, for her, had never been about raising her voice. It had always been about knowing who she was and refusing to shrink for someone else's comfort. And today, here, Noah Gate, C-12, the same narrative had replayed. But there was a difference. This time, she wasn't alone in her silence. This time, the system that misjudged her would be forced to reckon not just with her presence, but with her absence in trust, in contracts, in integrity. And the people who had watched it unfold would carry that echo long after the flight took off. "You might want to look at the used models in the back," the saleswoman had once said. "This line's typically reserved for major corporations." Ariana Collins had only smiled, Perfect. I am a major corporation. And she had turned and walked away. No need to raise her voice. No need to make a point. Because true power wasn't loud. It didn't need permission. It didn't need acknowledgement. It simply was. And now, at Gate C-12 of LaGuardia Airport, the same story played out. But there was one essential difference. She wasn't the one quietly enduring prejudice anymore. She was the one making the entire system look at itself and flinch. When Vanessa Liu extended her hand with deliberate humility, inviting her to board, it wasn't just a gesture of apology. It was an institutional reset. And when Justin Cole, representing the legal arm of Aerovista Airlines, slightly bowed his head in apology, Ariana didn't need to comment on the mistake, because the mistake wasn't the problem. The reason behind it was, "Ms. Collins, please proceed. The crew has been informed," Vanessa said, stepping to the side, her tone softer, no less polished executive, more human being clearing the path. Ariana nodded lightly, without emotion, not smug, not forgiving, just certain, because she wasn't walking forward for their approval. She was walking forward because the path was always her 7 if they'd tried to block it. The corridor leading to the aircraft glowed under stark white lights. And at the cabin door, Jordan Avery, the chief flight attendant, stood waiting. He gave a slight, respectful, bow more reverent than customary, more aware. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Collins," he said softly. "If there's anything you need before takeoff, please don't hesitate." It wasn't just protocol. It was apology in motion. Ariana didn't answer. She handed him her bag and stepped into the first-class cabin. Seat 1A was there untouched, perfectly arranged. A folded napkin rested beside a chilled bottle of water, the label facing outward. The leather gleamed under the overhead light. She sat down, adjusted the neck pillow slightly, and she didn't look around. She didn't need to, because every pair of eyes had already turned toward her. Outside the plane, back at the counter, Jenna Whitmore stood paralyzed, her face pale, her hands clasped so tightly they ached. Her colleague, Tara Jensen, who had remained silent through most of the ordeal, now leaned close and whispered just enough for her to hear, "That's the woman feeding this entire cabin with farm-fresh produce, the face of the whole Fresh Altitude campaign. And you just tried to stop her because she didn't look the part." Jenna opened her mouth, as if to defend herself, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. On board. Jordan turned once more to Ariana. "I saw your talk at the sustainability conference last year," he said quietly. "My brother was there too. He used to work a desk job. After hearing you, he left it. Now he runs a small organic farm outside Tacoma." Ariana looked at him for the first time since boarding. Her lips curved just barely, but it was real. "Well," she said, "then he's heading in the right direction." Then she turned her gaze toward the window, where the early morning light glinted off the plane's wing like the final shimmer of a long, cold storm. She didn't say another word. She didn't have to, because when a woman dares to stand still in the face of prejudice, the entire system, not just a person, has to step back and see itself. Behind her, Vanessa Liu walked the quiet private lane with a mind still echoing Ariana's words. "Funny," Ariana had said earlier, her tone sharp but controlled. "I was told this wasn't my place." She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't lashed out. But those few words had landed harder than any accusation, because they hit at the very heart of Aerovista's polished image. Vanessa had handled fraud, discrimination lawsuits, and internal collapses. But nothing had ever made her feel as small or as exposed as that single statement. She didn't respond. She simply bowed her head, just slightly, but meaningfully. An unspoken sentence passed between them. "We were wrong, and you never had to prove anything." Back in seat 1A, something had shifted. It wasn't visible. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. The air in the first-class cabin had grown heavier, not with tension, but with consciousness. The attendants, from Jordan to the young beverage manager, moved more carefully now, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Something serious had taken place, and now every action felt like it had to live up to something larger than service. Ariana didn't ask for anything. No drink, no favor, no extra comfort. She didn't need to. Her silence had already redefined the space around her. She didn't drink the water. She didn't unfold the tray table. Ariana Collins simply sat, hands resting softly in her lap, her eyes focused on the wide expanse beyond the window as the morning light bled across the LaGuardia runway. In Aerovista's operations center, tucked away on the 10th floor of the terminal, Vanessa Liu stood at the head of a huddle that wasn't just urgent, it was historic. Gathered around her were department heads from HR, legal, and internal communications, each trying to process the damage. Justin Cole, who had just exited the aircraft minutes ago, removed his name tag and dropped it on the table like it weighed 10 pounds. Vanessa's voice was sharp, calm, but cutting. "We don't wait for this to hit the media," she said. "We need a list of every staff member involved, a draft of the internal communication, a detailed timeline of events every step, from when Ms. Collins arrived to now." A voice from the back asked hesitantly, "What if she posts about it?" Vanessa exhaled through a bitter laugh. "She won't need to. All it takes is one bystander to upload a photo, and the whole thing unravels on its own." And she was right. Within minutes, on a small, anonymous account, a tweet surfaced. "Black woman blocked at gate C-12. No shouting, no argument, just a phone call, and suddenly the airport stopped breathing." Attached was a single image, Ariana standing calmly, her hand still on her bag, as a security guard lingered uncomfortably close beside her. Hashtag spread like wildfire. "Oh, gate C-12. You, silent power. You, fresh flight fail in Minneapolis." Marcus Halliday stared at his screen. His jaw clenched as he read the tweet. No yelling, no camera drama, but that's what made it worse. It was real, controlled, undeniable. He called Vanessa. "We can't stop this story." "No," she answered, "but we can control how we respond. And what does Ms. Collins want?" Vanessa paused. "She wants that the next time someone like her stands at our gate." They're not left in silence. Back on the aircraft, Ariana finally closed her eyes, not from exhaustion, but to settle the weight of memory. She recalled the first day she'd made a delivery to Aerovista's test kitchen. She'd driven the old box truck herself, filled with rainbow chard, sun-sweet tomatoes, and fresh herbs still damp with dew. She'd unloaded each crate by hand. No assistant, no staff, just her, a clipboard, and a belief that if she proved her value, the prejudice would finally fade. But today had confirmed a bitter truth. Prejudice doesn't vanish. It waits, and it resurfaces when you least expect it. A flight attendant approached her gently, holding a meal tray with a linen cover. "Ms. Collins, we prepared a special meal for you. It's made with ingredients from your own farms." Ariana opened her eyes and looked at the woman with grace, not anger. "I'm not hungry," she said. Please don't do anything different for me. Let things be as they should be." The attendant nodded and bowed her head. She understood. This wasn't a moment for appeasement. It was one for reflection. Across the terminal, 3 nearby Aerovista gates suddenly displayed delayed internal review on their boarding signs. No public explanation. But inside the system, Vanessa had quietly issued an internal freeze. No more boarding. Not until they figured out how many Jennas were holding the gates with untrained eyes and unchecked authority. Meanwhile, in seat 1A, Ariana opened the leather folder in her lap. Inside, an ivory envelope. She slid it gently onto the tray table, not toward anyone, not for effect, but for impact. Vanessa, still standing just outside the cabin door, paused. She knew what was coming. Ariana opened the envelope. Inside, a printed copy of the original contract between Collins Earth Produce and Aerovista Airlines. The pages bore crisp print, clear codes, bold logos. At the bottom, 3 signatures: Ariana Collins, CEO, Marcus Halliday, Director of Culinary Services, Sean Bell, Midwest Legal Liaison. Ariana placed the contract on the metal surface with deliberate care. Then, without looking up, "This is the original document." Her voice was soft, low, unemotional, but each syllable dropped like iron. "Your first-class meals. Those are from me. The VIP lounge you promote in your ads. Also from me. The food system that salvaged your brand after the frozen meal scandal. Every fresh bite of that came from my network." Vanessa took the document, her fingers slightly trembling, not because of Ariana, but because of what she represented: a mirror. A reflection of everything the system pretended to be and everything it wasn't. "And today," Ariana Collins continued, her voice never rising, never faltering, "the one you deemed a threat, the one detained without cause, the one who didn't look right to your staff, is the very same person whose name appears on every fresh food tray you serve on this flight." Her words did not echo. They didn't need to. They settled into the air like stone-heavy, immovable, and irreversible. Jordan Avery, the lead flight attendant, stood nearby, tall and still. He didn't nod. He didn't bow. But he didn't look away either. He knew he was witnessing the exact moment a truth returned to its rightful place. A man in seat 1C, silver hair and a gray pinstripe suit, probably a lawyer from the look of him, gave the smallest of nods. He didn't speak, but his gaze said what the cabin now understood. This isn't just a personal insult. It's a systems failure. And the system just got called to the table. Ariana didn't stop there. From her folder, she pulled a single, handwritten note on plain ivory paper. She placed it beside the signed contract on the tray in front of her. The line was short. "No need for an apology. Clean up your system before you talk about culture." She looked directly at Vanessa Liu. "I don't need a carefully worded email," Ariana said, "and I don't need a PR tweet wrapped in hollow regret. I want change. Real, visible, structural change. And that begins by reassessing the people who hold authority without accountability." Vanessa was speechless for a moment. She had read the reports. She had watched Ariana from a distance for over a year. Her humility, her quiet leadership, her refusal to chase spotlights. But nothing in the partner files prepared her for this. This was not meekness. This was precision. "I understand," Vanessa said softly. "Good," Ariana replied, folding the note slowly, "because the next person you do this to won't have a contract in their bag. They might not have your regional director's number, and they'll be left carrying only your doubt." Back at Aerovista's internal system dashboard, Red flags lit up like a power grid under stress. HR initiated a full gate-level audit across LaGuardia's terminals. Internal communications paused the fresh altitude campaign not because of poor branding, but because it no longer deserved to run. Legal marked the incident with a Level 1 policy breach and began drafting an update for real-time anti-bias protocols. Estimated deadline 48 hours. Inside the cabin, Justin Cole returned this time silent, composed, but visibly rattled. He had read the interim report. Ariana, folding her documents, glanced up at him. Justin didn't speak, but the look in his eyes wasn't defense. It was recognition. This wasn't a reminder. It was a warning. She didn't threaten them with a press release. She didn't summon a lawyer. She simply placed the contract, her signature on the tray table of seat 1A. And a multi-billion-dollar institution had no choice but to sit up and take notice. She leaned back into the seat not to rest, but to release, because the confrontation was over. But the consequences were just beginning. Then, the boarding door opened again. 2 men entered, both in suits, one still holding a file, the paperclip barely keeping the pages together. Marcus Halliday, Chief of Food and Customer Experience. Beside him, once again, Justin Cole, Aerovista's Eastern Region Legal Advisor. They didn't pause. They walked straight to her seat. Ms. Collins, Marcus began, his voice tight with guilt. I can't begin to express how sorry I am for this unacceptable incident. You should never have been treated this way. We will. Ariana raised her hand gently, interrupting him before he could finish. Her voice was quiet, but it stopped them cold. I don't need an apology, Mr. Halliday. The air in the cabin froze again. I need you to change the way you look at people. I need you to stop hiding behind procedures every time your gut makes a biased assumption. Justin looked down, not out of shame, but because there was nothing left to justify. He had signed more diversity initiatives than he could count, hosted seminars, sat on equality panels, but now he was standing in front of proof that the gap between policy and practice was far wider than he had ever admitted. Ariana's gaze didn't soften. It didn't harden either. It simply held. You've written campaigns, printed flyers, plastered inclusion banners across your terminals. But when a black woman presents a valid first-class ticket, your team still chooses suspicion over protocol. That's not in your manuals, she added. That's in the minds of the people you've entrusted with power. Vanessa stood behind them, silent. For the first time in her career, she bowed her head not out of courtesy, but out of acknowledgement. The kind of bow that meant we were wrong, and you don't owe us forgiveness. No one else spoke. No more corporate lines. No more procedural defenses. Because everyone now understood. This wasn't about that flight. This wasn't about one staff member. This was about the invisible architecture of assumption and silence, and Ariana Collins had forced them to finally see it. No apology, Ariana thought, could ever substitute for action. No financial compensation could ever reverse the slow erosion caused by being seen as a threat not for anything you did, but simply for existing as you are. Across from her, Vanessa Liu took a deep breath and gave a subtle nod to her assistant. The boarding door reopened. The Aerovista flight to San Francisco, which was now 27 minutes delayed, still sat at the gate, its engines quiet, its crew subdued. But no one was rushing, because the real delay wasn't on the runway. It was in the minds of the people who had to start changing how they saw the world. No more explanations, no more flimsy promises, no last-minute offers of business cards, just silence. Silence heavier than any speech ever prepared in a crisis binder, As the boarding door closed again, Jordan Avery, the lead flight attendant, stepped forward and leaned just slightly toward Ariana. "Miss Collins," he said gently, "I wanted to thank you. Not for the contract, but for not bowing to them. I always wished my mom could have done that the day she got stopped at the bank, just for wearing flip-flops." Ariana looked at him, really looked, and in that young man's eyes, she saw something old, not in age, but in history, a pain, a memory, a shared wound. She didn't reply with words, just a slight nod, the kind that passes silently between people who have lived through the same invisible war. The war of being judged at first glance. At the adjacent gate, C-10, C-11, and C-13 passengers murmured over their phones and looked at screens now flashing with new alerts. Delayed, internal operational review. Boarding temporarily suspended, awaiting updated verification protocol. What they didn't know was this Aerovista had quietly ordered a 3-hour halt to boarding across the Northeast Corridor. It wasn't because of weather, or air traffic, or staff shortages. It was because the airline needed to figure out how many Haleys were quietly standing at gates across the country making decisions that felt small but shattered trust in big ways. All it took was a phone call, a wrong look, and a silence, delivered in the right moment. In seat 1A. Ariana Collins leaned her head gently against the cushion. Her eyes closed not from exhaustion, but reflection. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel vindicated. She just felt. It was time to rebuild. From the ground up, starting with those who never imagined they needed to learn how to see people differently. This seat, this small, upholstered space, was the same one she had been assigned weeks ago when she booked her ticket. No one needed to announce it was first class anymore. They all knew now who truly belonged there. Jordan returned quietly. He didn't ask her what she wanted. He carefully picked up her leather bag, fastened the strap, and placed it at her feet. Then, he opened a chilled bottle of mineral water, poured it into a silver-rimmed glass, and placed it on the tray without a word. "If you need anything," he whispered, "just let me know." Ariana didn't respond with words. She nodded, just once. Her hands folded lightly in her lap, posture composed, spine upright. Her eyes still rested on the window. Outside, the first light of morning crept across LaGuardia's runway. Gentle, golden, unapologetic. The aircraft had not lifted yet, but something inside it already had. The passengers around Hermione in tailored suits, scarves, and carry-ons full of power had started watching her, not with disdain, not even with curiosity, but with thought. The man in seat 1C, the lawyer with the gold ring and the restless thumbs, tapped open his tablet, then let it sit idly in his lap. He wasn't reading. He was reflecting. The woman in 2A, designer glasses perched on her nose, pulled a blanket over her lap but couldn't help glancing Ariana's way again. No one said anything. No one apologized. But Ariana didn't need them to, because sometimes even awkward silence is a confession. From the back of the cabin, a young flight attendant, barely 22, maybe, walked slowly down the aisle. Her steps were light, her eyes uncertain. She held a small silver tray. On it, a single chocolate bar wrapped in foil, and a folded note card with uneven edge, handwritten, clearly last minute. She stopped in front of Ariana. "From me and a few others," the girl whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "We don't know the full story, but we know something was wrong, and we wanted you to know. Not everyone stayed silent." Ariana turned slowly to look at the girl. She didn't smile. She didn't cry, but her eyes softened. And in that softness, the young woman saw what she needed to see. She had said enough. On the card was a line written in careful, slanted penmanship. "Thank you for not staying silent. Because of you, we know when to stand up." Ariana's hand touched the corner of the card. She didn't pick it up. She just let it rest there, visible. For anyone who passed by to see it and wonder, well, why would someone need to be thanked for simply standing still? Back at Aerovista's Regional Operations Center on the 10th floor of LaGuardia Airport, the mood was tense. Vanessa Liu stood at the head of the internal crisis meeting. Behind her, screens displayed flight data, delay reports, and internal messaging dashboards. The executive heads of HR, legal, and communications were seated waiting. Justin Cole stood off to the side, having just returned from the tarmac. Vanessa didn't sit. She spoke clearly, not with anger, but with certainty. "We cannot afford to wait for the media," she said. "We need a list of every staff member involved, a drafted communications response, and an updated procedural log." One junior manager raised a hand hesitantly. "What if Ms. Collins posts about it?" Vanessa shook her head, half sighing. "She doesn't have to post. Someone already is." And as she said it, an anonymous tweet was beginning to go viral. A black woman being blocked at gate C12. No shouting, no arguments, but when she pulled out her phone, the entire terminal held its breath. Hashtags yo gate C12. Silent power. Fresh flight fail from Minneapolis. Marcus Halliday read the tweet in silence. He didn't ask for clarification. He simply replied to Vanessa with a single message. She's not asking for an apology. She's demanding we never make the same mistake again. On the terminal screen, a blinking notification appeared under Flight 488. LGA to SFO, 38 minutes delayed. Reason suspension of priority passenger verification. No one in the operations room dared to ask for more details. Vanessa Liu stood in front of the electronic board, her jaw tight, her voice low but certain. "We don't fix mistakes by speeding through them," she said. "We fix them by facing what we've been too comfortable to ignore." A communications officer raised her voice timidly. "Do you think Ms. Collins will take this public?" Vanessa didn't answer immediately. Instead, her mind returned to that moment. Ariana's steady eyes when she said, "I don't need an apology. I need action." After a pause, Vanessa replied softly, "She won't need to. The people who witnessed it will tell the story for her." As if summoned by prophecy, the story had already begun to spread. In the airport lounge, a Reddit post quietly gained traction. No hashtags, no grand declarations, just a simple, clear-eyed account. I didn't know who she was. Just a black woman in a suit, holding a first-class ticket and being stopped. Then she made a phone call, and the entire terminal went quiet. No yelling, no drama. But after that, no one around her said another word. It wasn't a post chasing virality, but it found its audience anyway. The story of dignity under scrutiny, of silent strength in the face of bias, began threading its way through the corners of the internet where people valued quiet truths over loud noise. And just like that, Ariana Collins' name didn't need to be mentioned for the world to start understanding what had happened. Onboard Flight 488. The engines rumbled softly beneath the cabin floor. The wheels began to roll across the tarmac. Ariana closed her eyes not to sleep, but to remember. The flower shop in Cleveland that had refused to sell her carnations, because young girls like you usually don't buy these for their mothers. The proposal she submitted for a contract, only to be handed a job application. The unspoken expectation that her hands were meant for service, not leadership. And now Haley's face, frozen in uncertainty as Ariana pulled the contract from her leather bag. No anger, no triumph, just the unavoidable, unspeakable truth laid bare. That, Ariana realized, was real power. Not shouting, not demanding, just being right, and letting that righteousness speak for itself like embers burning under frost. The plane lifted, quietly cutting through the morning sky above LaGuardia. No applause, no flashbulbs, no visible celebration. But every passenger on that flight felt something had changed. This wasn't just a takeoff. This was the moment they crossed a line where silence stopped being neutrality and became resistance. In the airline's internal systems, 5 more AeroVista flights were simultaneously delayed. No explanations given, just cryptic phrases. Personnel coordination required, priority verification pending internal procedural review in progress. At the terminal, whispers swirled like snowflakes that refused to melt. "They're calling all department heads to the 6th floor," muttered a janitor. "I heard someone got stopped for not looking the part." A man whispered, "Turns out, she's the CEO of the company that feeds the whole first-class cabin." "Damn." Another replied, "Wrong person, wrong time." No official press release, no breaking news banner, but the entire airport felt frozen. Back at the 10th floor of AeroVista's regional office, every staffer involved with Gate C-12 had been quietly removed from active duty. No terminations yet, just absences and silence. The kind that isn't about confusion, but reckoning. For the first time, the question echoed through internal Slack channels, emails, and whispered calls. Who gets to define what first class looks like? And how many people have we kept out not because they were wrong, but because they didn't fit someone's imagination? Haley Dorsey, who had once held Ariana's ticket like it was a counterfeit bill, no longer saw her name on tomorrow's staff roster. She didn't ask for an explanation. She didn't get escorted out. She left quietly, her footsteps echoing in the corridors like afterthoughts. But the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was the eyes of her coworkers, the ones who had stood beside her just hours ago, now avoiding her. Not out of ignorance, but out of shame. Mia, the only one who had tried to stop the mistake, sat alone in the corner of the internal debrief room. Her hands were wrapped around a cold paper coffee cup, fingers tapping softly on its sides. A colleague leaned in and whispered, "Is this really that big a deal?" Mia didn't look up. She only replied, "There are some people who don't have to shout, but when they stand still, an entire airport has to hold its breath." Meanwhile, far from the whispers and frozen terminals, Flight 488 landed smoothly in San Francisco. The sun had risen further by now, washing the windows in amber light. Ariana Collins didn't rush to unbuckle her seatbelt. The other passengers fumbled for their phones, sent messages, called drivers. But she sat still, hands in her lap, eyes open, breathing calmly, as if to mark the moment not with motion, but with memory. She had arrived, and somewhere in the space between the clouds and the concrete, so had her message. Ariana Collins remained seated in seat 1A, her hands folded gently in her lap, her shoulders relaxed. She didn't rush. She didn't need to, because the real arrival had already happened, not in San Francisco, but in the hearts of those who had watched her stand her ground. As she stepped off the plane, no one asked for her boarding pass. No one needed to see ID. There was only Jordan Avery, the head flight attendant, watching with quiet pride. And the pilotan older man with tired eyes and a deep frown softened only by truth, offered her a small, respectful nod, not for her rank, but for her truth. Ariana moved through the terminal with grace, near the baggage claim. A driver held up a sign. A. Collins, Earth Produce. She slid into the back of the black Lincoln Town car and let the door close behind her like the last page of a chapter. Moments later, her phone vibrated with a burst of notifications. Email from Vanessa. Liu, full review of our customer access protocols is now underway. Text from Maggie. You just did what no DEI summit has managed in a decade. They're rewriting the entire SOP. Link to a blog post. Black CEO stopped at airport, their silence shakes an airline. Ariana didn't open the link. She didn't need to read the headlines. She already knew what mattered had been said, and she'd said it without ever raising her voice. At the Marriott Grand Bay, where the Western Food Sustainability Summit was in full swings, murmurs buzzed through the corridors like electricity before a storm. Is she really coming? I heard she's the one who was stopped this morning. Horizon halted operations in 5 terminals. That's got to be her. When Ariana walked in through the side entrance of the hall, no one clapped. No spotlight followed her. But the room tilted, not physically, but atmospherically. The air shifted. She wore a dove-gray jacket, a modest silk blouse, and a small silver pin shaped like a leaf, the subtle, elegant symbol of Collins Earth Produce. No one introduced her. No one had to. Because sometimes a woman walks into a room and becomes its axis without speaking a single word. When the event coordinator finally took the mic, clearing his throat nervously, he simply said, "Please welcome Ms. Ariana Collins." Ariana stepped forward, nodded once, and took the microphone in both hands. Her voice was steady, her tone soft, but precise as stone. "I'm not going to talk about what happened this morning," she began. "I'm going to talk about what made it possible to happen, and what we leaders in food, supply chains, and systems must do differently." She stood tall at center stage, as if she hadn't just been held at a boarding gate by suspicion hours earlier. No signs of injury, no bitterness, only stillness. Her gaze moved calmly across the front row, where executives of major grocers, airlines, and agriculture logistics companies sat without blinking. No one asked about the airport. No one dared. They already knew. Ariana began it with an accusation, but with a story. 18 months ago, one of our partner farms in Kansas nearly lost their beet harvest. Why, she asked, her tone light. Because someone missed an email. A warehouse manager was out sick. His replacement didn't think the shipment was important enough. A few pens began to scribble. People shifted in their seats. They were listening. "We always say it's the system," she continued, "the software, the oversight, the underpaid intern. But sometimes it's none of those things. Sometimes it's a snap judgment about a person that breaks the chain." The room seemed to pause. She let the silence stretch, just enough to make it clear this wasn't about vegetables anymore. Then she went on. "You can have 5-tier quality assurance. You can scan QR codes. You can spend $5 million on logistics optimization. But if one employee looks at a customer's shoes and decides they don't belong in first class, then your entire system is running on bias, not business." A quiet breath moved through the room, like wind through wheat. No laughter, no objections, just stillness. "You don't have a food supply chain," she said plainly. "You have prejudice, packaged, shipped, repeated." One of the retail chain CEOs in the front row shifted uncomfortably. The head of airline procurement looked down, adjusting his cuffs. Someone else coughed, then fell still again. Ariana didn't flinch. "I've been mistaken for a delivery driver, told to use the back entrance, after signing a $1 million deal. I've been handed a job application instead of the winning bid. And today I was asked to prove I belonged in a seat that I built the food system for. There was no drama in her voice, only gravity. And I didn't shout. I didn't post. I didn't threaten. I simply stood still, and a system collapsed under the weight of its own assumptions. No one asked questions. They didn't need to, because they knew. They'd seen the flight delays, the whispers, the photos online, and now they were hearing it from the woman who made it impossible to ignore. Ariana closed her remarks with a simple statement. Systems don't change from PowerPoints. They change when one person refuses to move, and the rest are forced to ask themselves why they expected her to. And with that, she stepped away from the microphone. The room didn't erupt in applause. It held its breath, and then after, a beatit exhaled. Ariana Collins paused at the podium. Her voice had been steady for 20 minutes, but now it softened, lowered just enough to feel like a whisper spoken across a long hallway of time. We can optimize shelf life. We can shorten processing cycles. But don't shorten the time it takes to understand a person. Her eyes scanned the quiet room. Because decay doesn't start in the produce crate. It starts in the gaze. The applause didn't come all at once. It arrived in scattered waves, first from a corner in the back, then the front row, then the middle seats. It wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine. A slow rising from those who understood, from those who had once judged too quickly, from those who would now think twice. Ariana stepped off the stage without fanfare. No music, no spotlight trailing her. She moved quietly down the corridor beside the conference hall, her footsteps echoing softly against the marble. A man in an olive green suit approached her, walking alongside without introduction. His badge read, Logistics Lead, Pacific Retail Group. He didn't speak at first. They walked together for a moment before he finally said, almost as if confessing to a friend, that part about not rushing to assess a person, I think it's going to make me see my team differently. Ariana gave a small smile, never turning to him. That's enough, she said. That's why I stood there. And she kept walking, no cameras following her, no press waiting at the door, just a woman moving with quiet certainty, carrying the truth like armor no one could tear away. When Ariana Collins left the Marriott Grand Bay, she didn't leave with a media entourage, no tweet, no post, no soundbite for TV. A reporter from Business Equity Weekly approached her in the lobby with a microphone half lifted. Could we get a quote about what happened at LaGuardia? Ariana gently shook her head. I came here to speak about food systems, not airport stories. Later. Another invitation came from a national television panel about unconscious bias in travel. Ariana replied with just one line. Silence isn't inaction. But not every struggle needs to be televised. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She was just unwilling to let the story be twisted into noise. Still, change came, and it came quietly, but undeniably. 1 week after the incident at LaGuardia, Aerovista Airlines issued a subtle internal announcement, a new strategic partnership with Equal Ground, a civil rights organization specializing in workplace equity audits and bias reform. No major press release, just a newsletter quietly sent to all departments. But those who read between the lines understood this was the apology, not spoken, but executed. In the next 3 months, every frontline employee attended a mandatory training on unconscious bias and nonverbal profiling. Customer confrontation reports began triggering Level 2 internal audits, not simple memos. KPIs were updated, not just productivity and punctuality, but cultural engagement and bias mitigation. And at Gate 17, the very ground where the quake had started, temporarily shut down. A process re-engineering site. No one mentioned Ariana's name, but every staff member working that morning knew why their next 5-hour meeting involved reviewing security footage and role-play scenarios. In a small kitchen in Cleveland, where the peeling paint and off-white ceiling fan had long outlived their warranties, Louise Collins sipped her tea beside the breakfast table, the table where Ariana once practiced multiplication tables, where grocery budgets were calculated down to the last coupon. Louise looked down at an open business magazine. The headline read, "The Silent Force: How One CEO Triggered an Airline Overhaul Without Saying a Word." She didn't read the whole article. She didn't need to. She set it down, smiled to herself, and muttered under her breath, "That's my girl." Never had to raise her voice to be heard. Meanwhile, across the country, inside a staff meeting at Falcon Air, one of AeroVista's top competitors, an HR director stood before a slide quoting Ariana's line, "Decay begins not in the vegetable crate, but in the gaze." Someone in the room asked, "What book is that from?" Their team leader simply said, "It's not from a book. It's from real life. And if we don't learn from it, we'll be next." Back at Collins Earth Produce, Ariana went about her day as always. The shipments continued. Rainbow chard, cantaloupes, and squash rolled out of Ohio, bound for distribution centers across the Midwest. There were no PR banners on their website, no public statements, no hashtags, just quiet, consistent work. But in the third-floor office above the sorting floor, where framed photos of Ariana's old roadside vegetable stand hung above a desk made of reclaimed wood, a new card was pinned beside her planning calendar. It was handwritten, anonymous. The message read, "I watched you say nothing, but the whole airport had to stop. Thank you for teaching me that resistance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stands tall." Ariana folded the card, tucked it into the drawer beside her pen, then turned back to the winter produce rotation chart. There was still work to do. Because Ariana never needed applause. She never needed a campaign. She just needed to keep doing what was right and let the silence tell the story. In a world that often sizes people up based on their clothes, their voice, their seat, or the shade of their skin, Ariana Collins reminded us of something essential. True power doesn't shout. It shows up, stands still, and makes the whole world blink. She never shouted. She never sued. She never raised her voice. But when Ariana Collins stood her ground, the entire system had to sit down and re-examine itself. Not because she was loud, but because she was right. In a world where appearance often decides worth, she reminded us, true power doesn't always roar, it simply refuses to move. So the next time you see someone being questioned for who they are, ask yourself, are we protecting procedure or just protecting bias? And remember, change doesn't always begin with a protest. Sometimes it begins with a woman holding her place in line and refusing to step back. If this story moved you, let it ripple further. Like, share, and subscribe to help these stories reach the people who need to hear them most. We'll see you in the next journey where ordinary moments meet extraordinary courage.